Welcome to the Creative Visionaries podcast. My name is Tori Barker, a digital marketing specialist, business owner, mom, and you guessed it, a creative visionary. This podcast is about inspiring business owners, building connections, sharing success stories, and motivating others. Join me on this journey as we tap into your true potential and unleash your inner visionary. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the Creative Visionaries podcast. I am here today with our guest, Bob Woolverton, and I'm excited for you to hear about his journey getting to his career as a leadership speaker and trainer for top-tier leadership training. Bob, welcome on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Tori. Thank you for having me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, so tell us about your journey and how you came to this place in your life and what you're doing right now.
Well, I started, back in 1984 in the law enforcement. And I was second generation law enforcement. My father had done his career with the Seattle Police Department. And I went to work for a city outside of Seattle, out in the suburbs sort of thing. And as I went into work in that career, within a very short period of time, I promoted to first level supervision. And I think anybody, no matter when they promote, whether they promote to first level supervision, to middle management, or the executive level, they want to learn to be a good leader. And that's really what started my leadership journey. Now, picture that this is back in the 1980s, so about 1988, 1989, and I'm going to classes that are labeled leadership classes, but what they were teaching was planning, organizing, directing, controlling, and then that's what they thought leadership was back in the 80s, in the late 80s, but that's management. But oh boy, was I a great manager. I was great with numbers and I was great with controlling and planning and organizing. I mean, that sort of stuff. I'm very left brain. So all that stuff came very natural to me. But then as time went on, what I realized that I was missing this isn't leadership, this is management. So then I started on a leadership journey, trying to learn how to be a better leader. And of course, as the curriculum changed, leadership classes truly became leadership classes. And I was a graduate of the FBI National Academy. I went to the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia in 1995, learned some leadership techniques there, and a lot of mentoring sort of thing going on, trying to learn from other leaders, started a leadership book club at work, trying to learn from the best-selling leadership books at the time. But it wasn't until age 52 when I went back to college and got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, both in management and leadership. And really, I think it was the master's degree that really laid it up. And finally, the light bulb came on. After decades of experience and then putting that academic experience and marrying those two together, that's when the light bulb came on for me. And then I started teaching leadership theories and so on. I became a leadership instructor at the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. And I still do that today because I've become so passionate about sharing what I've learned about leadership and how to be an effective leader. And now with all of this hindsight, I look back and I had 5 bosses, basically 5 different chiefs of police for my career. And one of them was really a great leader. One of them stood out heads and shoulders above everybody else. And now when I look back, I can identify exactly why that person was such a great leader, why the whole organization was so inspired and we were so proud of the organization we worked for, and what those differences were between that one leader and the other 4 that I worked for, that basically they were just along for the ride. They weren't leading anything. They were just along for the ride. So
they didn't have that education or knowledge to apply that leadership, right?
That's where most people get their leadership experience, is just from mimicking the person that was ahead of them. They're learning from within their organization most of the time. Matter of fact, some time ago, it was the United States Chamber of Commerce did a survey and asked people, where did you learn your leadership experience from? And most of them said it was trial by fire. It was like thrown in the water and learn to swim sort of thing. And then the second greatest one was from leadership books and classes, and then basically mimicking what you had seen in the workplace. And that's what I see in my field. And I actually see it in a lot of places. Was actually Rod Covey, who was the former chief of the Port of Seattle Police Department. He wrote this one time, I think it was on LinkedIn, I saw it. And he talked about how in our industry, people get promoted because they're a really great technician, they get promoted to the next level. But the only thing they learn about leadership is the person that preceded them. So they learned from their old supervisor, who learned from their previous supervisor. And all along that chain, over decades of well-intended people, really may not have known much about leadership at all. And there is so much to learn. And that's why I get so passionate about teaching these classes, because when you understand the intrinsic motivation for people, why they come to work for you, when you start getting that picture and realizing what am I lacking in providing the right environment for that person, that's where the true leadership comes out. And that's what I get so inspired about. That's why I love teaching the classes that I teach.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about leadership myself, and find that, it's so interesting if there is a disconnect at the top of a company, top level, that there's no leadership, how that trickles down and affects the entire organization. And just having the knowledge and the experience and putting forth, the guidance and leading your organization in the right way makes such a huge difference.
Well, one of the tests that I like to use in my class, and I just use it as an example to get people to start thinking about how they're providing direction with an organization. And I will ask them to list the top 3 to 5 priorities of their organization.
Mm.
And it's interesting when I have people in my class that are from the same organization, like say middle managers, and I've actually had this happen before, where 2 middle managers were sitting next to each other from the same organization. And when I asked them to write down on a piece of paper the top 3 to 5 priorities of the organization, they kind of paused, and then they looked at each other and they just busted out laughing, because they knew they weren't going to write down the same answer. Well, if your employees don't know what the top priorities are of your organization, especially your middle managers, I can guarantee you the line employees don't know. But what that tells me is that the executive levels not providing the direction that the organization needs, or they think they're providing it and the message isn't getting through somehow.
Yeah,
so that's also a critical component too, is to make sure that you get feedback, because from whatever level you're currently residing, whether it's middle management or executive, and say you send out a new policy, well, you issue that policy expecting a certain outcome. And if you don't get feedback to make sure you're getting the outcome you expect, where the rubber meets the road, that could be a catastrophic failure. I utilize it, of course, being in law enforcement, we would have to qualify with our handguns every 6 months. And I would characterize that with the fact it would be like, if you went to the gun range, and of course your intent is to hit the bullseye on the target, right? So you know all the mechanics. So you know the mechanics, you line up the sights and you slowly squeeze the trigger and you fire off a round. And then you walk away and you never get feedback to find out if you really did hit the bullseye or not. Well, that's the same thing as if you issue a policy, you're expecting it to have a particular outcome, i.e. hit the bullseye, and you know all the mechanics of how to issue the bullseye or how to issue the policy.
Yeah.
But if you don't get the feedback from where the rubber meets the road to make sure you're getting the outcome you expect, you may never even come close to hitting the bullseye. It might get down to the line level and they're going, what the heck are they talking about? Or what are they thinking? This doesn't make any sense at all. And then it just falls into the big void and nothing ever changes.
Yeah. And that just talks to the point about, like, when you think about the message getting to the people throughout the organization, everybody receives a message or interprets something differently. And so as a leader, that's another thing that you have to be mindful of and aware of, is that the message that you're putting across is coming through and being received in the right way. Because it's like, some people are visual, some people are audio, different ways that people receive messages, and being able as a leader to construe and kind of get that message across in the right way is another important aspect of that role too.
Well, and that's what we were talking about earlier before the podcast started, focusing on results. Yeah. So when you issue that communication, whether it's a policy or whatever it is, you are intending it's going to accomplish something. It's going to have some sort of result. Yeah. And unless you have a feedback cycle to ensure that result occurred, you don't know if you're getting the results you want or not. And that's supposed to be your responsibility, is to focus on results.
Yeah. So you're talking about the 3 little known responsibilities of primary leadership. So talk about that. So what are those 3 primary leadership responsibilities, and why are they important?
Okay, well, this became, I should say I noticed this because being in a paramilitary organization, I would frequently hear people say, well, I'm in charge of this, I'm in charge of detectives, or I'm in charge of this division or something like that. Although I should say, since my retirement, I've also learned that it's not just specific to my law enforcement industry. I hear it in the private sector all the time. I'm in charge of this, or I'm in charge of that. And my take on it is that you're not so much in charge as you're responsible for the outcomes of either your team, your division, or the organization, depending where you are. Whether you promoted to first level supervision, then you're responsible for the outcomes or the results of your team. If you promoted to middle management, then you're responsible for the outcomes or the results of maybe an entire division or multiple divisions even.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're promoted to the executive level, well, then you're responsible for the outcomes or results of the entire organization. And that's where I talk about the first responsibility is to focus on results. But the benefit of that is it gets you out of that micromanagement issue. And I hear so many complaints from line level employees. I hate being micromanaged. I hate being micromanaged. My boss is such a micromanager. Well, my experience through that has been that when we were a line level employee, I refer to that as the technician, the person that actually does the work. We were a really great technician. We did the work really well, and that's why we got promoted.
Yeah.
But we've got to realize we've got to step back now and not focus on how many nails to hammer and how many holes to drill. We have to focus on the results. And when we can focus on the results, that's when we get away from micromanagement, allow people to use their ingenuity. In fact, I think it was General George Patton that was famous for this particular quote. Said, don't tell people how to do something, tell them what you want them to accomplish and get out of their way, and their ingenuity will amaze you. And that's what people want in the workplace. They want to be empowered to use their knowledge, skills, and abilities to get the result that you want. So when you focus on results, you're in essence empowering your people, which stimulates that intrinsic motivation. It just makes it a much better workplace. Now, so that's the number one responsibility. And like I said, that applies no matter what level you get promoted to. The second responsibility is to facilitate the success of the people you're responsible for. And again, whether it's at the team level, the division level, or the organizational level, doesn't matter what level you are, focus on on facilitating their success, making sure that they have the knowledge, skills, and ability, that they've gotten the training they need, that they have the tools that they need, that they have the environment that they need to be successful at what they're doing, and that you empower them to do that. Again, you're focusing on results, build me that wall and let them use their ingenuity. And if they need training, make sure they get the training, or if they need better tools or whatever the situation is, you're facilitating that success.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that builds onto trust, where people realize, yeah, they're not here to find everything that I do wrong. My boss is doing everything they can to help me succeed and make my career better. And then the third responsibility, and again, this applies to all three levels, whether it's first level, middle management, or executive level, is to safeguard their welfare. Make sure that they have a safe work environment, make sure that they have the proper safety training, that it's a work environment free of harassment or these other issues, anything that can cause either the employee to get injured or to get fired or to get sued or any of this stuff, to safeguard their welfare. That's your responsibility. And so what I would hope that would happen is that when you start thinking in these terms of focusing on results, facilitating their success, and safeguarding their welfare, is that if you do have a situation that arises where somebody potentially gets in trouble or gets a citizen complaint or whatever, that your first thought as the supervisor, as the manager, as the executive, that your first thought is, what could I have done or what should I have done to prevent this from occurring to my employee? Did I have some culpability in this? And a lot of times what you'll find is your culpability is that there wasn't proper communication in that policy, that either it wasn't understood the way you intended it, or whatever the situation may be, and that you should be doing something different. And I find that if leaders start looking at it that way, as if they have a situation that goes awry in the workplace, if they start looking at their own personal responsibility first, what could I have done or what should I have done to prevent this from occurring to my employee that I'm responsible for, it changes the whole dynamics of the workplace. And that's where real trust comes in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think you just kind of touched on it, but the fact that a leader will look within and see how they can improve and what needs to be changed in order for the result to be better, I think that truly in itself is another sign of a great leader, somebody who's willing to look at themselves and say, okay, maybe I didn't communicate this the right way, or maybe we need to improve this, and not only just being like, you're the one who did it wrong, or pointing the finger, pointing blame, and really taking that ownership and the responsibility and building the leadership, qualities within your organization that way too.
Well, and that's where it's really vital on specific situations that may arise in the workplace. But I also relate that to, I am a big proponent of 360-degree surveys. And I remember there was a time when I was assigned to patrol operations, and I had a colleague, another police captain. He was responsible for night shift, I was responsible for day shift, and we collaborated a lot together. I mean, we were on this leadership journey together. We highly respect each other. We were all about making our entire division better overall. And so we built a survey monkey. So our people that reported to us could give us feedback on these different criteria. And, it was all anonymous and so on, but we wanted the feedback. We wanted,
Yeah.
critical feedback if we could get it. And what was really interesting in some of the topics that we thought we really excelled, the feedback told us, yeah, you have some work to do. And in other areas where we thought we were still weak, the employees would tell us, oh, no, you're doing great in that area, sort of thing. So until you close that feedback loop, you might be thinking, oh, I'm weak here, I need to work on this. And your employees are thinking, oh, no, you're weak on this other thing, you should be working on that. And with that disconnect, it's going to cause problem. And that's where I say a lot of times that if, as the leader, if I rate myself on a scale of 1 to 10 and say, I think I'm an 8, but my employees think I'm a 4, that gap, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But if I think I'm an 8 and my employees think I'm a 7, well, that's a pretty small gap. So that means we're doing okay there. We've got the same issues at heart then, that we're all getting better together.
Definitely want your numbers a little closer than to align a little bit better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think that these 360-degree reviews, however you execute them, whether you do a Survey Monkey or whatever, you have to get that feedback, because we have the best of intentions. I don't think anybody comes to work wanting to be a jerk.
Right.
Nobody does it. They want to be good, but you won't know unless you get that feedback. You get that, close that cycle. And again, it's that focus in on results. And that's just one aspect of what sort of results as a leader am I conveying to my people? And when they give me that feedback and say, wow, I thought I was doing better in this area, but obviously I need to work on that. And thank you for giving me that feedback, because I want to be better.
Right. Now, how have you seen over the years with the pandemic, the last couple of years that we're still kind of going through, how have you seen the transition with leadership from organizations being in person and office workspace versus now this virtual kind of lifestyle that we're all in? How have you seen leadership roles shift? Have you seen improvements? What's your thoughts on the shift with the virtual leadership?
Well, in my experience, so all of my classes have gone to virtual. And so I don't work in an office environment anymore, so I can't really address the office environment per se. And I know on the classes that I do virtually, it's really difficult, especially because I co-teach a 40-hour class. And man, if we were going to do a 40-hour podcast, it would be tough for us to sit here just even one-on-one, looking at each other when you've got a class of 35 people, in the class. And so in essence, what I've done is I bought basically the equivalent of TV switching equipment, so I can get more videos in there, make the switching. It's more like a TV show,
Yeah.
So they're just trying to keep it interesting. But there's a lot of the same communication issues that I have with organizations that are geographically dispersed. I mean, it's easy when you work in an office environment when everybody works in the same building or even works on the same floor.
Right.
Well, I went from an organization where we were all on one floor, and the organization grew enough, we built a new building, and now we had multiple floors. And just even being in the same building and that separation of floors, it was amazing how it adversely impacted personal relationships. There would be people you wouldn't see for months, or like a division would hire new employees you haven't even met in a year. They've been there already,
Right.
And just that amount of separation within the same building. And then you look at organizations that are geographically dispersed, where they've got, divisions in another state or even another country, and the challenges that come with those communication issues. I think that Zoom has helped, and these video platforms have helped a lot. But again, it's that communication loop.
Yeah.
We have a communication that we're intending to transmit a certain message, and we have to figure out how are we going to make sure that it was received the way that we intended it to be received, and that it's getting the results that we intended it to get.
Yeah. It's funny. My background before I started my business was in corporate. So I was in the office, right? The office, side by side, working with my, my colleagues, and everybody was in the same building. And then I started my own business, and I started, kind of solopreneur, working from home, and then was ready to start growing my company. And then COVID hit. And so I was like, okay, so I'm definitely working from home, right? And the team that I've built is all virtual. So I've got team members who are in Oregon and Florida and Washington. And so we're all geographically over, dispersed across the US. And so for me, because leadership is important to me and communication and trust and teamwork, I have, weekly calls with my team so that we can see face to face, right? It could be a 15-minute call, it could be an hour call, but whatever we need to do, we have that touch point. And then, like you said, different means of communication we have, we'll have a Voxer channel that we send voice chats through, text messages. We have, project management tools. It's like over communication is like huge for us because we are virtual and things are moving so quickly. And so I think a lot of people can relate with that too, that, coming from a corporate world now into a virtual space and working with clients all across the US and internationally, some people may be working internationally too. And having that communication and just over communicating is such a huge, just natural thing for us now.
Yeah, and it's difficult, especially for the CEO, because they're supposed to be communicating what the vision is, and making sure that everybody has bought into that. They've been part of the process of building that and moving it forward, and so on. So to ensure that communication, I think it was one of the former CEOs of Westinghouse. He estimated he spent 45% of his day walking around transmitting that vision. This is what we aspire to accomplish. This is what we aspire to become, and making sure that everybody was on board with that. So that communication issue is extremely important.
Yeah, you had mentioned doing a book club. Well, I have one of my team members and she's on the leadership team with me. And so we read books together. It's our little mini book club, right? And so we read all types of leadership books, business books, entrepreneur books. And then we share notes, right? What did you get from this chapter? What did you do there? And for that, I can't imagine not having these outlets or these books to have as training modules and podcasts like this, where people can listen in and learn from different methodologies or tips and how to be a better leader and just whatever it is that you're looking for. There's so much information out there, and I just love the leadership book side of things. So when you said you had a book club, I'm like, oh yes, I'm totally on board.
Well, and I think that was such a great place to start. I mean, we definitely learned a lot, and that's what we were doing. We were doing like you were doing, taking the tips that we were learning from the books and how does this apply to our everyday real life sort of thing.
Right.
But here's where the light bulb really came on for me. So I mentioned how I was assigned to the Patrol Operations Division. And when I was first assigned there, I came from a completely different floor, hadn't worked in this division before. And I went to the sergeants that reported directly to me, and I went to them individually. And because I wanted to get an idea of the direction they had been getting and what they felt the mission was of this division.
Yeah.
So I went to them individually and I asked them, so as a division, do you think we were successful last year? And if so, why? Yes or no? And what are you using as a measure of success? Well, every sergeant said to me, oh yeah, I think we were totally successful. Well, okay, why? What are you using as a measure of success? They all had completely different measures of success. I mean, and they were so far opposite of each other. Well, what this tells me is that they weren't getting the direction they needed. So with the best of intentions, they were doing what they thought they should be doing, but everybody was rowing in a different direction, And so that's where it's kind of like that question I said before is ask your people, what are the top 3 to 5 priorities of your organization? Yeah. And if they're all on the same sheet of music, great. And if they're not, well, then it's time to provide direction. So that's when I first got assigned to this division. Then I recognized, wow, my first responsibility here is to provide direction to this division of what we aspired to accomplish as a division. And so that's where, just asking your people, were we successful last year? Yes or no? And what do you use in a measure of success? That could be another test or quiz that you give to find out, am I doing my job as a leader, or what do I need to do differently? Because everybody that reported to me, they came to work every day with the best of intentions. They wanted to do good work, but they hadn't been getting direction. So they fill in the gap, that void of information. They will fill in the gap with something that they think is the right thing, but it may not align with the vision of the entire or the mission of the entire organization.
Yeah. And when you were reading these books, the leadership books, you said, earlier when we were talking that the focus of a lot of these books were on leaders, the relationship between leaders and the followers. And so, what's the essence of the leadership that you feel needs to be conveyed, or talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so I mentioned earlier about that interpersonal relationship, and that's where I think the vast majority of the best-selling leadership books, they focus on that interpersonal relationship, and that's the influencer part.
Mm.
That's the trust and the vulnerability. And we already touched a little bit on trust and developing that within the organization. But when I look at the bosses in my industry, I should say the chiefs in my industry that were very successful, and what I've seen in private practice, the people that are very successful versus those that aren't very successful leaders, the difference has been is they were providing direction to the organization. They had a vision that inspired people and said, yes, I want to be part of that. I had worked for people that said, I just want everybody to get along. Well, to me, that's like the skipper on the bridge of the battleship, and he's just got his hand on the wheel, and we're not going to change course. We're not going to do anything different. We're just going to go this way. Well, they're not leading anything. They're along for the ride.
Right.
So somebody that's providing direction of how are we going to do things different in the future? How are we going to be better in the future? How are we going to be different in the future? And then when people buy into that, go, that totally makes sense. And I want to contribute to making that happen. Because that's what people want when we talk about theories of human motivation. There's 6 different theories of human motivation, and they all are kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. But really, and when we talk about needs theory, people want to do something meaningful with their lives. They want to contribute to something bigger than themselves. And that's where that intrinsic motivation comes from. So the organization that they go to work for is when it's doing something meaningful and they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. That's where people love what they do. And there's some of the big tech companies, that do that. I mean, you don't have to search too far, and you will find organizations that the vision is so compelling that the people that work for that organization, or even people coming out of college right now, they know who they want to go to work for because they're inspiring to work for. They're contributing to something meaningful that's going to change the world, that sort of thing. And that's what motivates people. And you don't necessarily have to change the world, but if you're in business and you're successful, you're filling some sort of need within the community. I mean, that's why customers are buying your product, because you're fulfilling a need. But are you doing it better than everybody else? And when you can contribute to something that's meaningful, that people say, yeah, I want to buy this because I need this, it makes my life better. That's something great to contribute to. But it's, when I talk about the person that's at the helm and they're not ever going to change course and they're just along for the ride. When I was in business school, they said there's 2 types of businesses: those that are changing and those that are going out of business. So whether you're public or private, nonprofit or whatever, you've got to be changing. Our environment is constantly changing. So the role of the leader is to scan the horizon, see how our things are changing, say, we need to go this direction, and this is why, and this is how we can make things better. And that's when, you get people on board with that. And like I said, that one boss that I had, we used to have we had shirts made up with our logo embroidered on it. We had, workout sweats, with the name of our organization on the sleeve and the pant. And we were proud, to wear our sweats when we were jogging through town or whatever, because we were proud to be part of the organization.
Yeah.
And we didn't have any problems recruiting. We didn't have any problems with retention, for that period that we had that one really great leader that was indeed a leader. I learned so much from him. And in hindsight, I've learned so much more because I wasn't even mature enough to absorb it all at the time. There were things that he would tell me and I'm like, I don't quite get it yet. But now, years later, I totally get what he meant.
Yeah. You're like, I'm going to hold on to that thought because I know one day it'll start to make sense.
Exactly.
Well, I want to ask one final question, and it kind of, ties into our conversation about, this whole journey and stuff and your career and looking back. And so that final question would be, what is something you wish someone had told you during your career journey?
Well, we really were just about touching on it there. It wasn't,
Yeah.
He did tell me. I wasn't mature enough to understand it at the time, but so one of the things that I've added to my curriculum in the last year is ethical decision-making in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started building that curriculum, that's when the light bulb came on and I go, oh man, when Mark told me this thing, and what he told me, he says, whenever you have an issue that, that you're looking how to resolve an issue, he says, you have to take that sphere and you have to turn it and look at it from every different angle. And it didn't really resonate with me. I'm trying to well, how do you take this issue and look at it from different angles? But then the light bulb came on for me when I started building my curriculum on ethical decision making. And you start looking at things from a consequentialism approach, from a deontological approach, from a virtue ethics approach, from these different approaches. And like that's what Mark was talking about all those years ago, was, looking at it from all these different angles. I just didn't know how to apply it at the time. I just didn't have what I'd say the workplace maturity in essence. And so when I added this part to my curriculum as ethical decision making in the workplace, where we talk about the deontological approaches and the virtue ethics approach and consequentialism, and how to make sure, because what you're doing is then you're looking at things from completely different angles and using all of that in your decision making matrix to make a decision that's not only the best decision you can make, but it's also defensible. If somebody goes, well, how did you come to that decision? That sounds ridiculous. Well, I evaluated this and I evaluated this and I evaluated that. And based on all that information combined, this was my final decision. And it makes it much more defensible to your board, in essence, if you're the CEO and, the board's going, well, why did you make that decision? Sort of thing. So there's a lot of value in that too.
Awesome. And so you touched a little bit on the trainings that you do. Can you just kind of tell us about what you do in your business and the training and how you help these executive leaders and leaders to improve their knowledge and growing their leadership role and their responsibilities?
Well, I take a couple of different approaches, and I will tell you right off the bat, I probably shouldn't start with this, but I'll start and then I'll go back the other way and come back to it again. So my definition of leadership is a very simple definition, and that's merely having the capacity to translate vision into reality. So in essence, you've got that vision of the future, whether you've defined it yourself or you've utilized, the team that you work with to develop that vision, and then be able to translate that into reality. In essence, it may take 3, 4, 5, 7 years to make it happen, but you're going down that path to make that happen. But to do that, there's a lot of steps to get there to even developing that. And so one of the things that I start with is I call it a systems analysis, because everything we do in our organization is a system that usually we've created ourselves, whether you want to call it a systems or a process or so on. It's some issue, right down to the way that we accept employment applications.
Right.
We figured out a process, how to get from A to B, and all the steps in between. And so when we can look at our organizations as a collection of systems and then make sure that they're as efficient as possible. And the best way to do that is the people that use that system every day is to get their feedback. And this is one of the places that I like to start in my training, because if you've got employees that are say, well, why do we do it this way? This doesn't make sense. And, the old autocratic response used to be, we don't want to hear what you have to say, just do what we tell you to do, sort of thing. At least our workplaces have become more enlightened now. If they don't have a good answer, like, well, why do we do it that way? They start researching it. And ultimately that research may lead to changing the process, but that's a red flag. If you've got employees going, this doesn't make any sense, why do we do it this way?
Yeah.
There may be a component they don't know yet because they haven't been exposed to it. And then you give them that information and they, that totally makes sense. But if you don't have that information to share, then maybe that process needs changing. And when somebody is stuck in a process or a system that they're doing every day and it doesn't make sense to them, or they think it's inefficient, or they think that it's stupid, that just tears down their morale. They don't want to work in an environment like that. That's where I like to start with middle managers and executives, is to understand how to improve systems, listen for those red flags. And I call it the 12-foot rule, that people that are within 12 feet of where that problem is occurring should be involved in solving that situation, because they do it every day. They're the experts. Absolutely. And that's where I say, if you used to be a great technician and now you've promoted all the way up to the executive level, things have changed, in that gap of time. Listen to your people, because they want to contribute. They want to make things better. They've got the best of attention. So start with the systems analysis and how to make those better and how to make things more efficient. Then I also talk about theories of motivation. And like I said earlier, there's 6 theories of human motivation. One of the most critical ones to morale within the workplace is what we call equity theory. And it's kind of a hilarious video, but it's absolutely true that it's built into our DNA that we recognize inequities in the workplace. That if I'm getting paid X and you're getting paid X, but I feel I'm working twice as hard as you are, and I'm going to get to a point like, why am I working so hard? I'm just going to fly below the radar and I'm going to, do what Tori does. She's making the same amount of money I'm doing, and there's a whole bunch of different theories, on way people will deal with that. But a lot of times the way they start to restore equity is they increase their absenteeism. They start calling in sick. they're like, well, God, I was working so hard and I wasn't getting rewarded. This is how I'm going to get my reward back. I'm going to start using my sick leave.
Yeah.
So you see things like that, or people just quit. They go to a different division, or quit their boss, or something like that. So that one's important to know. But the more critical one to understand how your vision relates to motivating employees is through needs theory. So we all have needs that we're trying to fulfill, and we've got, and this was kind of an interesting story too, is that, years ago when I went through my first level supervisor training, they were telling me about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I remember thinking, why do I need to know this? This doesn't make any sense. Why do I need, as a first line supervisor, why do I need to know Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Well, let's roll the clock ahead a couple of decades. Now I totally get it, because we, as human beings, we are fulfilling certain needs. We have the low level needs. We obviously have to have food and water and shelter. Well, if they're one of our employees, we've taken care of that with a paycheck. So now they can afford to put a roof over their head, they can put food on their table. So we've taken care of those needs. Now they move up to the belongingness. They want to belong to something. They want to, contribute to something, and they want something to be more meaningful. And then you get to the belongingness, and now I forgot the other two levels, but basically you get to that ultimate level of success where, you have reached the pinnacle of success. You're contributing to something meaningful. You're helping facilitate other people's success. People look up to you. You've got that sort of respect. But at the same time, now imagine you've got an employee that has reached that level of success in the workplace, and then they come to you and they go, boss, my spouse just filed for divorce, and I'm about to lose my home and lose custody of my kids. Well, now where's their focus? Right back down to those lower level needs. Where am I going to live? And I'm going to lose that belongingness. I'm going to lose my family. I'm going to lose custody of my kids. So now when they were up here, as this high performer, now their needs have been, they've been swept out from underneath them, and they're going to be focusing there. So we need to be responsive to that we have to recognize things are going to change. And we need to help this person, whether it's through an employee assistance program or whatever, to get through this, to basically get back on their feet and get them back to where they were, sort of thing. So understanding needs theory is very critical, at the middle management and executive level. And then ultimately, when we get down, then we get to the point where when we understand how contributing to something more meaningful than yourself, that what we all want to do, we all want our lives to be meaningful. We want our children to be proud of us. Oh, my mom does this, or my dad does this, and they're so proud of, whether you're a firefighter, a police officer, an architect, or what doctor or whatever, it doesn't matter. We want our children to be proud of us, and so we're all striving to get to that level. Well, when we define our vision of what our organization is doing, that's something we want to contribute that we're proud of doing. And that our children will look at us, oh, my mom works at SpaceX, my mom does this, and we're going to, put people on Mars or whatever, and that future sort of thing, that people are inspired by what they do. And that relates to that vision creation. And so when we can convey that, and it's also important, not so much that the vision itself is just so incredibly unique, but that people's different contribution to it. And I use the analogy of the inner workings of a clock, because you take the back off of a clock and you've got all these wheels and cogs and springs, but the mission of the clock is to display the time of day on the front. But all these cogs and wheels and springs have a different function. But if any one of them doesn't do their function, the whole machine comes to a grinding halt.
Absolutely.
And that's where there was the story, and I don't know if this is true, but it's sure been run at folklore for a long time, back in the 60s, when President Kennedy had challenged America to put a man on the moon. And he took a tour of NASA, and while he's touring NASA, there's a young man that works there, and he goes up to me and says, well, what do you do here at NASA? And the man was so proud that the president was asking him about his job, and he says, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. Well, that person was the janitor. But he knew that even though he wasn't sitting at the pointy end of the rocket or pushing the launch button, that his contribution was just as important as everybody else, keeping the workplace safe and orderly and clean. And so that was his contribution to that. And I think that's where a lot of times we lose the value for our clerical staff. They get to the point where they're just pushing paper every day, and you wouldn't be here if we didn't need this function. We couldn't do our mission without your role here. And we've got to remind our employees of what they're contributing to, and that what they're contributing to is absolutely something meaningful. And that's where we get to that vision, translating it into reality. And then once we get that vision, now we have to do the strategic planning. How
Yeah.
are we going to translate that? And who's got what responsibilities and who's got what accountability? And then when we decide what the accountability is, who has what step or what component of it, and this is my responsibility, this is my contribution to putting a man on the moon or whatever the mission is, that's where that intrinsic motivation comes from. And that's someplace that everybody wants to work.
Yeah, and I'm sure that this work that you do is something that's always changing, right? So it's not, set it and forget it. It's always evolving and people are growing and learning. And so it takes time to master and it takes time to continue, tweaking and making sure that everything's working together and always reviewing and coming together to revisit that vision and make sure that it's all aligned and everyone's on the same page.
Oh, absolutely. Because that's what I was saying earlier was that there's two types of businesses, those that are changing, those that are going out of business, because
Yep.
our environment is constantly changing. So that vision may change before you ever even get there. It may
Yeah.
change, or there may
Yeah.
be what I like to refer to as change orders along the way. Like, oh, well, we've learned something here. We've got to change this, or that's never going to succeed,
Yeah.
sort of thing. And so even your strategic plan, that's got to constantly be modern and going to be changed. It's where something that you had planned. And in my classes, I use the example of a construction plan to build a custom home.
Mm.
Well, you've got the blueprints and you've got all the stages of construction, where you do the dirt work and the foundation first and all the steps that you go through.
Yeah.
And then as you go through it, you realize, oh, this door opens across here and that's not going to work. So now we've got a change order, or you have weather delays or supply
Absolutely.
delays. So things are constantly changing and you've got to be able to deal with that and change. You're absolutely right. You don't just set it and forget it.
Yeah.
It's a living document, between the vision statement and the plan and how you're going to translate that into reality. Yeah, completely living documents.
Well, I think that you have so much knowledge and so much information that, many people can benefit from. And, I'm happy that I can share that here on the podcast and kind of give people a glimpse of what you do and how you can help them. And, is there a certain place that you like to send people if they're interested to learn more about the trainings that you can help them with?
Well, my website is toptierleadershiptraining.com. And so I've got a lot of information there, and I've got a whole new set of videos that are coming out that are going to be updated and will be much better, because one of the things that I've learned is through my academic pursuits and probably some of my career, my videos were very academic. I'm going to change those, make those more relational. I'm going to include more personal stories so that they will make better sense to people. But ultimately, what I love to do is I love to go and speak to people about leadership, whether it's an association meeting, a breakout session, and I also do multi-day trainings for corporations. So I will go in and we can talk about leadership. We can talk about theories of human motivation, and we can talk about how to eliminate the top 2 employee complaints. And those top 2 employee complaints are: number 1, micromanagement, and number 2 is lack of direction. I used to know a guy that he for years, he taught classes to clerical staff. And every time he taught a class, he asked everybody in the class, what are your top 2 complaints about your employer? And over the years, he said, I can categorize 80% of the complaints into 2 categories. And that's micromanagement and lack of direction. And it's so funny because as I talk about that, I was just having cocktails with a woman a few weeks ago, and she was telling me about her adult daughter in the workplace and all of her complaints. Well, I had just talked about micromanagement and lack of direction. And then as she was describing her daughter's complaints, she goes, well, wait a second. She's complaining about micromanagement and lack of direction, like you were just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear it all the time.
You're like, see, it is a thing. I'm telling you.
Yeah, we can resolve those 2 issues right away. Those are easy.
Well, Bob, it's been a pleasure talking to you. And like I said, I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and insight and, giving us a glimpse of what it is that you can do. And I hope that, people will visit your website and see if, they can hire you to come to an event or, set up a training for their organization and definitely take advantage of this knowledge that you have and helping people become better leaders and see that vision and grow together. So I just wanted to thank you for being on the podcast. And any final words or any final, tips for anyone in this wonderful leadership conversation?
Oh gosh, I think, we were so conversational. I think I kind of scattered all around, a whole bunch of stuff there, but really, I think, those 3 responsibilities, those are a great place to start. Focus on results, facilitate the success of your people, and safeguard their welfare. If you do those three things, you are on the start to a great leadership career that people will ultimately, respect you for. And you may not know it right away. Someday the comments will come back to you and say, you were the best boss that I ever had. And really, isn't that what we all want to do? We want to be the best we can possibly be.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. And everybody go out there, be a great leader, and look forward to hearing you and seeing you hopefully at a live event so I can learn from you as well.
Well, thank you, Tori. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been really fun talking to you this afternoon.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for listening to the Creative Visionaries podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe, leave us a review, or share with a friend. Also, make sure to visit us online at creativevisionariespodcast.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. And stay tuned for more episodes to come. And remember, it's time to tap into your true potential and unleash your inner visionary.